you virtually this Earth Day week to return to what I like to call my alma mater spiritu, my spiritual home from so many years ago. But I'm going to start with a brilliant observation. Everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Now, like many of us, you may think that Mark Twain said that. And Hal Holbrook and others have attributed this aphorism to him. But there's no authority for his authorship. There is, however, a similar line from a student which Mark Twain cited in one of his books. Climate lasts all the time, but weather is only a few days. And another variation is cited as coming from one of Twain's collaborators. Climate is what we expect. Weather is what we get. I will, with lack of evidence, continue to believe that he probably repeated all of these lines in many of his lectures, because I'm sure I saw Hal Holbrook do that on television as Mark Twain. Today, I do want to talk to you a few minutes about the weather we have been getting and the reality of the ongoing changes in climate, which we can now expect if we don't change it. But I will also share some thoughts about how and why we are reacting to weather and climate changes in the way that we are, and what I believe we must choose to do in response. I hope you will bear with me as I warm up to that focus with some observations of my own. You know, after the service with Christine Robinson a couple of months ago, I was talking with Judy Turnipseed, and she suggested that maybe the worship team could invite me to come speak. And I mentioned that my current ministry focus has come to be on alerting folks to climate change with the Climate Reality Project as my retirement project. I have appreciated very much the cooperation I received from the worship team and from those on the green team, like Kevin, who have tried to make a difference. And I want to recognize and appreciate the continuing inspiration of my longtime colleague, Reverend Nina Gray, who has been, for at least a year or so, the leader of the Climate Reality chapter, according to the website. And from that website, I gather that Nina and Kevin coordinated last year's celebration of the 50th Earth Day for Columbia. And of course, they deserve recognition for that. I'm not clear right now, other than this important sermon, whether there's a significant effort for Earth Day in Columbia, but I imagine there is. Earth Day is like so many special events, like normal human and institutional rites of passage. They're exceptions to our daily routines. They gather our focus and help us give energy to particular things. I remember being with this congregation for the installations of two of your ministers, Mark Alstrom in, I think, 1988, and Neil Jones, I believe, 2013. I especially remember being honored by receiving your ordination on June 1st, 1997, and the great party afterwards, which Sue Urita and Lee Mingy and Pat Moore and Judy and a lot of others organized to really celebrate the occasion for us. Good memories. But natural disasters and extreme weather events are memorable in a different way. They're memories of anxiety and terror or discomfort and loss. Just 1 year ago this week, I understand there were 36 tornadoes in the Midlands area around you. Surely that created a memorable impression before, during, and especially afterward. Most of you may remember the extreme weather which brought you your terrible floods in October of 2015, I think. We saw on the national news how much of Forest Acres and many of your creeks and rivers all around Columbia were overwhelmed. And you may remember with me the repeated flash floods of 5 Points before those storm sewers were upgraded in a construction project that seemed to last a very long time. With many of you, our family was in Columbia and experienced the fearful anticipation and reality of the near miss of the eye of Hurricane Hugo. It was much worse for those who got the full brunt of the storm just a few miles from us, near Charleston, Sumter, Charlotte, and even Raleigh. Of course, there have always been such weather events in Columbia and in the area over the years, but these may have been the worst in Columbia in our lifetimes. In other areas, obviously, there are natural disasters all the time. My family endured one unusually heavy blizzard at the mountain, and even a Mother's Day snowfall in our 4 years there. But we missed the major earthquakes, mudslides, and terrible fires in California and the historic floods in Augusta because they were before or after our brief time with them. But in our decade in quiet Massachusetts, we did not escape the hardships caused by several blizzards and other storms. But we did dodge the worst effects of occasional hurricane and winter nor'easters on the northeast coast. And there was even a tornado once while we were there, a few miles away in Worcester. But while we were there in Massachusetts, we had to support a church family, the Matthiases, who lost a son at sea with 32 shipmates when their ship, the El Faro, foundered during Hurricane Joaquin near Puerto Rico. Extreme weather trends like long hot summers and early spring blossoms tend to shape our impressions of local climate changes, along with these terrible events, storms and floods and droughts and fires. But systematic data collection over decades, even centuries, and through fossil evidence over millennia is more reliable than our immediate subjective impression. But we now know, it is undisputable, that the scientific consensus is that we are living through a time when we will have more and more extreme weather events caused by elevated global temperatures, coming from gases emitted by releases of hydrocarbons into the atmosphere. And we have to do something about it. And we know that intensive livestock farming and deforestation and many other associated farming related developments are accelerating that process. Now, as you know, Al Gore was given a Nobel Peace Prize for writing a book and producing a video which told all of us very convincingly about that inconvenient truth. You know, Al, the guy who paid his dues in so many ways in what seemed to be his inexorable path to the presidency, only to be upstaged by a Supreme Court decision favoring the guy who let an oil millionaire be in charge of foreign policy and almost everything else for 8 years. But I remember when Tom and Judy and I listened to Al Gore when he came to town in 1987. He had no chance in the South Carolina primary running against Jesse Jackson, and he dropped out pretty early. But during the past year or two, Nina Gray and Kevin and I have all given some time to get Al's latest insights and marching orders about what we can do about the immediacy and the reality of the climate crisis. We have each accepted this charge and volunteered to take this message to our people, to put our personal credibility on the line in every possible way. But what do we expect to achieve in changing our collective response to what now seems to be old news? Just this weekend, National Geographic sent me another solicitation based on their business decision to publish climate crisis articles, photos, updates in their magazine on a routine basis. I might take them up on that, not because I'm not aware, but because I need that continuing reinforcement. But I think we believe, Kevin and Nina and I, that our small contributions can help serve to raise our consciences of urgency, to empower and strengthen our resolve to do something. You know, I've been a life member with my wife of the Sierra Club for over 30 years. And that was just one little tiny thing, along with our participation in recycling and other things that we thought might make a difference. But as we have come to a greater consciousness through Al Gore and other efforts, we might expect that a rational response to this crisis might be to declare an emergency, to come together and determine an effective strategy and get to work. That's what we've been hoping for quite a while. And maybe it's just beginning to happen. Maybe. But maybe there's something deeper inside us, perhaps coming from our primitive brain, the amygdala at the base of our skulls, which leads us into a different frame. I have a short reading from Madeleine L'Engle, the author of many books. She said, "I rebel against death, yet I know that is how I respond to death's inevitability that is going to make me less or more fully alive." I recently ran across an excellent article in the Sun magazine, published in Chapel Hill, which was an interview with Sheldon Solomon about his conception of what he calls terror management theory. Solomon says, and with that name, how can we not pay attention? When we are reminded of our mortality, we shape our behavior and attitudes in ways which help us keep our fear of death contained. Experiments have shown that even subliminal reminders of death can cause us to eat more cookies, drink more alcohol, smoke more cigarettes, and drive more aggressively, if we have a predisposition to that anyway. Perhaps it's from our instinct to deal with our possible extinction that we act out of subconscious instincts to tell ourselves, carpe diem, seize the day, for tomorrow we die. In recent American history, many of our businesses and governmental leaders literally believed that the apocalypse and Armageddon might be just around the corner. And given that biblically based belief, it's almost understandable that they might choose to promote the exploitation of global resources as quickly as possible. In the most elemental sense, Solomon, again, a very important source, Solomon, tells us that we find ways to reinforce our sense of worth and self-esteem to try to reduce our fear. Thus, we act in ways which reinforce how our culture defines the ways that our individual and collective existence may have greater meaning. For some of us, that means we can act more selfishly, defining our self-interest in narrow ways, which would drive us to be more competitive, more sexist, more intolerant, more racist, and more xenophobic. And we saw too much of that the past 4 years. Even those who understand and accept the diagnosis of climate crisis may believe that life on Earth is doomed, no matter what we do. And their cultural identity and consensus, in a limited way, can inform their refusal to make constructive responses, just like refusing to wear a mask in the face of a pandemic. But fortunately, a growing proportion of us, meaning all of us, have a wider worldview as expressed in our Unitarian Universalist seventh principle, that all of creation is interconnected and interdependent, and that we have a responsibility to do something to make that clear and to make it living in our lives. Individuals inspired and informed by activists like Al Gore, Bill McKibben, and even Jane Fonda now include teenagers, Greta Thunberg from Sweden and young Jerome Foster from Washington, D.C., who have joined together for events like Earth Day over the past 50 years, but even more in recent times, through climate marches in Washington, in New York City, and in cities around the world. And the routine weekly Fire Drill Friday that we heard so much about from Jane Fonda's participation. And with the recent federal election giving a bare majority in Congress, we can finally begin to see some of the progresses that we had been urgently waiting for, asking for, and needing from national leaders. This week, on Thursday, I understand on April 22nd, there is an international summit called by our new president, in which he asked all of the leading industrial nations to join in a commitment to make things turn around, to reduce fossil fuel extraction and consumption, and to reduce the emission of carbon into the atmosphere. So maybe we are changing the culture. But what else can we do? I think we have to bring even more personal energy to the cause by using our voices and our influence to bear on local and state officials, the leaders that we know are connected to, and institutions and businesses that depend on our support. By our affiliation with a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we have joined in the covenant which calls upon us to affirm and promote our UU principles, all of them. We can be tempted to abstain, to stand aside and let others do what we would think of as the heavy lifting. We may want to believe that recycling our plastics, eating less meat, driving hybrid cars, trying to reduce our individual carbon footprint might be all that we really can do, all that we really feel comfortable doing. But maybe there's more. Maybe we need to become a little more uncomfortable. Maybe we need to spend a little more time to save the earth. Maybe we can show up for events and demonstrations. Maybe we can write emails to people of influence. Maybe we can withdraw support for people in organizations who aren't pursuing environmentally sound policies. Maybe we can make targeted contributions to pro-environmental activists and non-governmental organizations. Maybe we can listen more to people like Trish German, who's been trying to tell us about this since, early prehistoric times, almost 30 years ago. And maybe it's not too late. I have to believe that for the benefit of our grandchildren and for the benefit of the people, not only the people, but all the life forms of the world, we have to try. It's sort of like my own version of the story of the children throwing starfish back into the water after they've been washed onto the beach. Someone passing by on the beach stops to watch them for a few seconds. You know, there are thousands of those starfish out of the water. By the time you do half of these, the others will have died and it won't matter. So you can't possibly save them all. But the children don't stop what they're doing. We know, but we have to do something. And it's important to try. And like Mark Twain, I will report my own version of the weather and climate aphorism I cited at the beginning of this message today. Even though we can't change the weather, we must do everything we can to change the climate, because it is up to us. May our efforts be